You're listening to the Golightly Marshall Hour on freedomtalkradio.net.
Here is available in China and Japan, and I want to show you something quickly. What I want you to get to the Japanese people, if you can possibly do this. And what we have then is I put two magnets together, and that particular type magnet there with the hole in it is much better because you want to be able to take two magnets. Now this one I've marked it as a North Pole. The reason for that is we're in Australia, but if you're in Japan, it'll be the same thing. The North Pole faces the South Pole, so it's being drawn towards the North Pole. So if I was to turn that around, it'll flick back the other way. All right? Now what you want to do is have a North Pole on both sides. So you would buy these. Now let us assume that's a North Pole there, and that's a North Pole there, so the South Pole's on this side. You take that and you turn it over, but it's just two of them. Put a screw through it, and brass screw preferably, but it doesn't really matter. And pull them together because they're trying to repel. And then you wear them around your neck in a silver chain. Now the idea is that what this lady is talking about is the plutonium and these dreadful atoms that are flying around all over the world now. They are a positive charge. So if you've got them on. And what the problem is when you breathe them in. So if you have them around your neck and there's any particles that are floating in the air, they will be repelled away from you. So you'll be a walking shield. So I suggest you do that, and you can put them in your pocket, you can put them in your bed, you can put them in your shoes and socks and so forth, and your underwear, and that'll make a lot of difference to what's actually happening to you. So I'll leave it there, and then I'll come back with another video for tomorrow, and I'll show you some very, very interesting things concerning the stars, what's going on out there at the very moment of the Fukushima detonation. I want you all to listen very carefully, and please go and look at our YouTube uploads, and I want to show you something that may alleviate some of the suffering in Japan and, of course, North America and Europe. This is Alfred Weber and Lorraine Murray. She's an expert and has been blowing the whistle on for a very long time, and it's only an angelic protection that they haven't killed her for what she's been doing. So I'll play that and listen to it very carefully.
Yes, welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Weber, and we have the extraordinary privilege today to be with our guest independent scientist, Lorraine Murray, who's coming to us from Berkeley, California. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you. How are you today?
Yes, good.
Good.
As I understand it, in this landmark last article that you have just published on Fukushima, but going back and it surveyed the entire genesis of the nuclear industry and weapons industry, you and your colleague Lawrence Batis have made a discovery based on the Wigner effect and what's occurring at Fukushima. And could you summarize that for us? Because it's very important as to what the Fukushima plant has now become.
Yes. I'm going to read the quote from Mr. Batis. He is an engineer, former military, Navy. So he understands the situation at Fukushima like No one I know, except for you and me. But what he called it is, he said the Fukushima is a breeder reactor now for black dust. And he says, quote, "The Fukushima nuclear disaster has created a breeder reactor for the black dust that has been rendered in a fully and optimally weaponized condition." Now, this black dust is very radioactive. Fukushima Daiichi is now a full production facility for a highly weaponized particulate product and optimally weaponized condition. Oh, I screwed it up. Let me start again.
Okay.
The Fukushima nuclear disaster has created a breeder reactor for the black dust that has been rendered in a fully and optimally weaponized condition. Fukushima Daiichi is now a full production facility for a highly weaponized particulate product and optimally weaponized particulate product. I doubt if you will ever find anything better to render death to an enemy than Wigner dust. Fukushima is an industrial plant for creating the dust, the worst weaponized powder ever created, Wigner dust, with one exception: radioactive nanoparticles. And the process of making this dust is enough to kill the entire planet, much less the continuous dust releases for thousands of years.
Well, that's a lot, and it's a very depressing thought. Could you, and it's a very condensed statement with a lot of technical terms, and it's very heavy. So let's back off and let's go through it. What is this Wigner dust? What does it mean? What has happened? All that we know is that we've had a lot of stuff going on around reactor number 4. There's a lot of conflicting information in the media. Yes, it is ready. Yes, it is doing damage. No, it's safe. Yes, it is. No, it's safe. It's impossible to get any reliable information in the mainstream media. Impossible. And it's impossible to really understand what's going on. And it's impossible to understand what's really happening at the plant there. So could you really translate what you just said into what myself and just a normal person in the street could understand?
What I'm going to do is go back and go over the physical state of Fukushima now. What happened in the past is past, but the condition of the plant now is going to add additional radiation to our lives and our bodies, and it's transforming the entire planet, the whole global community, the international financial institutions. There is nothing that it is not touching. So I'm also going to give reliable sources. I've been on 20 speaking tours of Japan between the year 2000 and 2010. I spoke and consulted and advised members of the Japanese parliament. I did many press conferences all over Japan with all of the newspapers and media sources. I did 20 speaking tours all over the country. I've been in the nuclear power plants. I've met with TEPCO. I even took Dr. Ernest Sternglass on a 1-month speaking tour in about 2005. And so I know these sources are reliable, and I will be quoting the sources. People can read the paper. There are 100 references. They can go to the original material. This is an education effort to educate the public, the Japanese, the media, whoever is listening. But I know the information is good. Now, Prime Minister Nato Kan was the Prime Minister of Japan, and he was in a budget meeting in the Diet, that's the Japanese parliament, when the earthquake happened at 2:46 p.m. Japan time in the afternoon. And there are images of him in the meeting. Everybody's rocking back and forth as the earthquake's shaking all the chandeliers and everything. And he has been extremely honest in speaking out about what happened, and who would know better than he does? He was there, and he was in charge of the country. And what he stated was that all of the reactors, 1 through 4, had melted down by 7 p.m. after that earthquake. They went into meltdown immediately after the earthquake because all of the power lines were cut off. There was no outside electrical power coming into the plant, and none of the backup systems were able to function properly or even to get them started because the Stuxnet virus had sabotaged the whole control system of the Fukushima plant. Now, reactors 5 and 6 were also damaged, and apparently at least one of them had fuel in it, but they usually say that nothing happened to them. That's not true. The meltdown started within 15 minutes after the earthquake happened, and these reactors were already in heavy meltdown before the tsunami even hit the plant at 3:29. 3:30 p.m. At 3:29, a radiation detector about a mile from Reactor 1 was reporting radiation contamination leaks from the power plant. So that means that the reactor fuel was melted and probably fissioning. Yoichi Shimatsu, who was an editor of the Japan Times Weekly, has written a lot about it. And he wrote that Reactor 4, and that article is in my reference list also, so people can go and read it, and I recommend that they do. But he said Reactor 4 was loaded with a special MOX fuel. This is a new formula with highly enriched plutonium. It was hotter than the MOX fuel in Reactor 3. And guess what? Guess who was there that morning? It was a Mossad security group from Dimona in Israel and General Electric, and they're the ones who put the MOX fuel in the Stuxnet in the Fukushima operating system and reactors secretly in September of 2010. So here they are on the morning of the disaster, March 11th, 2011, back in the Fukushima plant, and they were upgrading a shroud that covers part of the reactor, and there was no reason to upgrade it unless they were putting a different, much hotter fuel in it. It wasn't an old shroud, and there was no justification for doing that except the fuel had been changed to a much hotter fuel. There were 202 MOX fuel rods in the spent fuel pool near the reactor, And what Yoichi Shimatsu also reported is that the military came in a few days later in a helicopter and removed a U.S. nuclear weapons military toy from the pool where the MOX fuel rods were stored. And there were also MOX fuel rods that were on the ground beside the reactor. They'd been putting them in, and everybody ran away when the earthquake and tsunami happened. Now, that military toy that the Japanese military removed was from Amarillo, Texas. That's all U.S. nuclear weapons facilities. This meltdown and disaster was actually modeled for the Department of Energy in about 1984, and it's called the Browns Ferry Simulated Meltdown for DOE and General Electric. The title is Station Blackout at Browns Ferry Unit 1, and exactly the same reactors were at Browns Ferry that were at Fukushima. And there's GE involved in all of this, and the Department of Energy, of course. So the simulation, actually I used it after the disaster to track and monitor and predict what would happen at Fukushima, and it was absolutely right on. It was correct. It told when the corium would burn through the floorboard of the reactor. Everything was just as they had predicted. And actually, a year later, TEPCO finally came out with a PowerPoint that confirmed exactly what the Browns Ferry report predicted and what I had been saying. So the Japanese Parliament commissioned an independent committee to investigate and make an independent report on the Fukushima disaster, and they concluded that Reactor 3 and the spent fuel pool in Unit 4 the MOX had gone into meltdown. And there were even more meltdowns in mid-March, the March 21st to 22nd. Takasaka, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Station. These are independent. They're all over the world. They did the best reporting. But they measured levels of fission products that indicate multiple events were going on. There is a ratio of 2 xenon isotopes that they use all over the world to monitor for potential illegal nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere. And all of these indicators were there. And we know from the radiation monitor a mile from Unit 1 that we know that it was already leaking fission products. The Mainichi Shimbun newspaper and TEPCO themselves finally admitted that the Reactor 4 pool had 202 fresh MOX fuel rods in it. And of course, that's what melted and continued melting over the weeks ahead. Now, Kei Sugaoka is a friend of mine. He's a GE inspector, nuclear power plant inspector. He's worked all over the world, and he actually went to the governor of Fukushima Prefecture in 2002, I believe, or 2000, and he warned him that they were putting MOX fuel in these reactors and that it was very unstable and dangerous, and because it has plutonium in it. And the governor passed a law that no MOX fuel could ever be used in any reactors in Fukushima Prefecture. So what GE and the Dimona Mossad security group did was completely illegal. The the unirradiated rods, scientists have made statements in the pool. If there's a fire and a meltdown, the plutonium goes into a very dangerous phase where it releases pulsed neutrons, very, very powerful bursts that can go a very long distance. Now, ABC News Australia reported that 4 nuclear power plants near Fukushima had been damaged. And that was Fukushima Daiichi, the one we're talking about, where the disaster happened. Fukushima Daini, which is only 10 kilometers, 6 miles away to the south. Onagawa, to the north of Fukushima, and Tokai Daini, number 2. I heard, because I had Japanese staying here who translated all the news, Japanese news, they told me that at least 7 reactors in Japan had been damaged by the Fukushima earthquake. Now, Russian scientists have now published a landmark scientific paper titled The Fukushima Plutonium Effect. So this puts the Fukushima disaster and the neutron pulsing on the map in terms of the scientific community. It was a new phenomenon. It's different from Sam Cohen's neutron bomb. He invented it. It's different from the China neutron bomb, which they detonated a few years ago. I have photographs of it. And it's different from the U.S. neutron mini nukes. They're called 4th generation nuclear weapons. And they're using these all over the battlefields. They're launched from howitzers for big, heavy artillery. And this is having the effect of leaving the infrastructure there. We know from bomb crater analyses from the attack on Lebanon by Israel that U.S. bombs were used. They were transported to Israel. They had the neutron bomb inside the depleted uranium bunker buster, 2 nuclear wars in 1 bomb. And what happens is the infrastructure is left untouched, but the neutrons have exactly what the Wigner effect has. These neutrons pass through human bodies. They cause radiation-related illnesses and sickness and long lingering deaths. And so it's really an attack on the civilian population without having the radiation fingerprint. They are radioactive, the bomb craters, for about 2 weeks. New York City, the deuterium and tritium fingerprint was found in the aerosolized dust and everything collected around New York City for 5 months. And the scientist who was asked informally to monitor 9/11 from a rooftop a mile away with his specialized equipment. His name is Dr. Cahill from UC Davis. He's an expert on atmospheric pollution. And he took his equipment, but he was not asked to do it until that 2-week period was over when there was evidence of radioactivity. After 2 weeks, it's called neutron activation. The radiation disappears, and it just looks like a normal bomb crater. So this is a very different nuclear weapon. It's using a nuclear power plant as a pulsed neutron weapon source. And it certainly probably damaged those other 3 reactors around Fukushima and could have damaged more. But also it bombarded the whole population within hundreds of miles. And the USS Ronald Reagan big aircraft carrier was 2.5 miles offshore from the Fukushima plant when it blew up, and the Navy certainly knew it was going to blow up. They had radiation monitors that said it was leaking, and yet they sat there until Fukushima blew up. So the whole aircraft carrier and everybody on it was exposed to radiation. The planes were all contaminated, and so it was taken back to the U.S. and out of commission. Oh, the whole crew is sick and dying, and it's just a disaster. But last week, in the last couple of weeks, that would be late May or early June, the news reported that the USS Ronald Reagan had been recommissioned. There's no way to decontaminate it. So they've put it back on the high seas, and I don't know what they're going to use it for, but any troublemakers in the Navy could end up being assigned to that ship, and that would be a real good way to get rid of them, radiation illness. So on March 14th, the MOX fuel melted, it was burning up, and there was a blow up. That was in Unit 3 that launched all those thousands of fuel rods into the sky. Pieces are all over Japan, and particulates are all over the world. From that one explosion, the hydrogen explosions were nothing. That was white smoke. It didn't release burned fuel rods into nano-sized particles all over the atmosphere and into the ocean. So the hydrogen explosions were minimal compared to reactor 3 and the spent fuel pool in building 4 burning. Now, that was reported in The Guardian. They had a videotape of that explosion. All of the videotapes of that explosion in the U.S. have been photoshopped, and the telltale bright orange heat, it was so hot in the reactor building right before it blew up that you could see the orange heat through the walls of the building. It looked like a candle that had been burning for a while. It was very, very hot, thousands of degrees centigrade. In July 2011, Alfred, if you remember, all agencies, official agencies, government agencies, and even the Independent Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, laboratories and facilities stopped reporting any information about the radiation, the contaminants they were identifying, the isotopes, or the amounts. But if you look at the increase in death rates, if you look at infant mortality, if you look at the releases that were reported before they stopped reporting in July 2011, you can see these spikes, and each of those spikes is another criticality event or spent fuel rods burning in the dried pools. All of those pools were damaged by the earthquake. And they were damaged, I want to emphasize, before the tsunami. TEPCO wants to blame everything on the tsunami. That's so they can do more of these disasters and accidents. But the whole nuclear industry is a gigantic booby trap in every way to poison the global population. And for instance, the backup diesel generators that were the emergency backup, they had batteries too, they were wired for 12-volt electricity, and they had the wrong voltage on the backup diesel generators for the reactors. So you can't put run a diesel generating backup unless you have the right compatible voltage as the reactor. There were many, many, many other things. For instance, the pad that the whole plant is sitting on was 35 meters high. It never would have, that accident never would have happened. The tsunami wouldn't have hit it. The earthquake wouldn't have damaged it so much because it was on landfill. But it was cut down to, I think, 10 meters off the ground for the platform, and it was landfill. So it just undermined the safety. It sabotaged the safety of the plant. There were lots of other things, too. So by July of 2013, all this huge steam and fog and mist was suddenly being reported in newspapers and media all over the world, covering the whole lagoon, the open ocean there in front of the nuclear power plant. And that indicated that the molten fuel that dripped out of the reactors burned through the floorboard of the plant and formed these big blobs underground. They're called elephant's feet from Chernobyl. It means that had melted down and then followed the geologic structure subsurface to follow the path of least resistance to the lagoon. And that corium is so hot, it's continuing to fission, that it started boiling the water in the lagoon offshore from Fukushima. That was reported by NHK. There are photos. There's a photo also in the article that we've posted.
freedomtalkradio.net.
So, do you have some questions?
Well, I'm still working on the original question, which has to do exactly what is this breeder reactor that the Fukushima facility has now become. What do we mean by a breeder reactor? What is this Wigner dust? What does that affect? Is this being carried worldwide? What are the impacts of that?
Yes.
I mean, this raises a whole new series of questions, and so
Yes.
I'm still working on that. I mean, it's very useful, all of this background that you're giving. So
Right.
that is still what I'm working on.
Okay, so, well, let's just ask one question. Who did it? The Tromsø, Norway HARP facility in Norway is owned by a supranational consortium of countries, and it's called EISCAT, EISCAT. So it's owned by Britain, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Germany, Japan, and China. And that basically is the bankers. And they are transforming the global economy to they're taking down the Western economy. Fukushima is part of the methodology in order to build up, to pump the middle space, which is China and Russia, for a new global economy. So they have to break down the existing one, and that just happens to be us, unfortunately. So now we're going to talk about, I just wanted to mention the hydrovolcanic nuclear explosions. These are underground. They were predicted, and they started in December 2013. They're releasing radiation too. But let's go to the black dust. This is high temperature MOX fuel particulates and nanoparticles, and why they're toxic and how they're toxic. And they're quite different. The particulates that are being formed by the Wigner effect are they are that's caused by bombardment of particularly metals by neutrons or any of the energy from the nucleus, gamma rays, alpha particles, beta particles, X-rays. All of those come out of the nucleus of radioactive isotopes. And what they're doing is poking holes and making dislocations in the crystalline matrix, the atomic matrix of the metals and all other materials too, by the way, including humans. And it's this was first reported at Chernobyl when the scientists went down after 10 or 15 years into the basement to look at the elephant feet, and they saw this coating of dust, and every time they went back, the dust was thicker. Well, that is from the disintegration of the surface atoms of, for instance, metal, and it just turns it to dust as it eats down through the metal, weakening the metal and brittling it. And this has a very serious implication now, because it means the entire infrastructure of the Fukushima power plant, of Japan, of airplanes, of the entire infrastructure of the planet now is being bombarded daily, nightly, 24 hours a day with Fukushima radiation. And it's breaking down the global infrastructure and the global population, all living things. Now,
that's what you call the Wigner effect.
Yeah, that's the Wigner effect.
Okay, the effect of radiation on matter.
Yes.
Okay.
And so it is creating particulates, dust, particles that are highly mobile. They're very, very radioactive, and they're full of for instance, the fuel rods. There are pieces of them flying all over everywhere. They flew everywhere, all over Japan. Well, they are disintegrating too, and that's releasing particulates that a lot of them have plutonium and uranium in them. That goes into people's lungs. And I can tell you that by 1963, at the end of nuclear bomb testing, atmospheric testing, compared to lung cancer rates in England from 1850 to 1860, before man-made radiation existed, lung cancer has increased by 1963 in Hawaii 17,000%. That's from nuclear technologies. And that's called a pathway cancer. So we're going to see huge increases in pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, mouth cancer, throat cancer, tongue cancer, stomach cancer, colon cancer, all of the areas in the body, the organs that are the kidney cancer, that anything carrying food or liquids through the body is going to be damaging the pathway organs and pathways through the body first. And that also, cesium has a horrific effect on the heart. So we have a planet of death and illnesses that is increasing every day. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know that doctors in Japan... Yes.
No, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
I know that doctors in Japan, in the Fukushima area, put their patients and their families on a macrobiotic diet. It's brown rice, miso, umaibashi, which is salty plum paste. You can buy that in a Japanese store, salty plum paste. And tsukomoni, which is pickled vegetables and fruit too. Done the traditional Japanese way, and I actually make it in my refrigerator. I buy a little jar or container of probiotic sauerkraut, and then I just pour the juice off, and I use that to start the probiotic process. Now, the doctors who have used that in the Fukushima area report that their families are healthy and their workers are healthy, but anyone on a Western diet is sick, dying, or dead already, just 3 years after the disaster.
Now, this is what I was going to intervene with. Do we have any public health data, or is there any data at all that's existing now, or patterns that are coming in that we can say that there's an increase in mortality or deaths or cancers or impacts of that we could say are attributable to Fukushima at all?
Yes, very, very, very good data. It's from the Centers for Disease Control. That's a U.S. official reporting agency. Every county in the U.S. reports to that agency once a week. That's what he used, and you can bet they cheat on what they're reporting because they do. They're trying to protect the government. But Robert Soltysik, we call him Bobby One, is a statistician, a very good statistician, and he works a lot with epidemiologists. So he spent months crunching the data from the Centers for Disease Control. And by the end of the year 2011, he had calculated, using CDC data, that, with their numbers, it came out to be 53,000 Americans had already died. These are unexplained death rates that increase, and there's no explanation for them because you look at the last 3 or 6 years, and if you see a steady trend, you know that a huge stepped increase suddenly in a few months or less than a year is got to be an environmental cause, since it's all over the United States. So he has a website called optimalprediction.com. And he estimates, actually, he said the CDC data isn't that good, and he did not include children, babies, newborns, or spontaneous abortions. I also want to mention the embryos within the first 2 or 3 weeks after conception. Even from low-level radiation exposure, in my studies, 80% of the embryos die from any radiation exposure. Very, very low. It just kills them. So I said, Bobby, I think at least 100,000 died if you include children and newborns and everything. He said, well, I would say it's 100,000 just because of the way the CDC reports their data and everything. It's very conservative. He said, I would estimate at least 100,000 had died, and that is not including the children, babies, and the pre-birth babies that are still in utero. So they did report on May 6, 2014, in Norway, there's a scientific publication reporting that hot particles from uranium, plutonium, spent fuel were trapped in air filters April 1st to 4th, 2011. And the scientists concluded that this is radiation from the burning or the burning or melted spent fuel and the reactors, the fuel in the reactors. And they said it did not come to Norway across Asia. It came to Norway over the Canadian Arctic or through Canada and the United States. And that would be air masses, the jet stream, whatever. A lot of the air moves from west to east because of the Earth spinning and so forth and so on. So, yes, we do have data on the death rates. When you look at the regions he analyzed, it illustrates what I always say. The radiation levels that people are being exposed to locally depend on weather and geography. And just because you're on the East Coast or in Florida or Canada, in Halifax or whatever, doesn't mean that you're safe. The radiation levels were even higher in one city in Florida and in Pittsburgh than they were out here in California. So it depends on the geography and the weather. How much rain out and snow also is very efficient at removing radioactive particles from air masses. Now, we have autoradiographs from Japan showing these hot particles in tree twigs and leaves. We have autoradiograph from soil from a temple in northern Japan, and an autoradiograph, a very famous one by Dr. Mori, of a bird. He laid it on this special radiation sensitive paper. Sometimes you have to leave it there for a month. And you could see that most of these hot particles were on the flight feathers on the wings and in the stomach and gut of the bird because the food it ate was contaminated as well as the water. They have also been reported from individual events in all over the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia. This stuff is all over the place, and it's completely mixed in the whole global atmosphere in 1 year. We have a photograph, scanning electron microscope photo of depleted uranium particulates. That was from 1979. That's in my report. And people can see what they look like. They're little tiny round hollow spheres. And what happens is when the temperatures are 3,000 to 5,000 degrees centigrade or even 2,000, the metal, these radioactive metals, they vaporize and they form a gas. And then as the cold air around them moves in and chills them, they form hollow round spheres that float in air currents and stay suspended all over the world. And then you have a whole lot more of them are produced per kilogram of spent fuel because they're hollow inside. So it's a huge multiplier effect, and the chemistry happens on the surface of these particulates. Nanoparticles are much smaller, and you can't even see them under a special scanning electron microscope. They're so tiny. They're 1/10 of a micron or smaller in diameter. And they have 3 very, very, very toxic effects. One is the chemical effect. Uranium, for instance, is a hormone and estrogen disruptor. It can sterilize, it can cause endometriosis, it's feminizing men and masculinizing women because it's disturbing the hormones and the hormonal balance. And then the radiation effect, that's the alpha particle or beta particle and gamma or X-rays that are released from the nucleus of the radioactive atom. And they each have a different pathway, a different energy, and a different effect. The most devastating effect of nanoparticles, and the Fukushima plant is producing huge volumes of nanoparticles because the heat is so high. And that effect is called the catalytic or enzyme effect, nonspecific catalyst, nonspecific enzyme. And those are carried in the cholesterol and lipids in the blood. They go right into the cells. And in a cell, it's a syncopated dance, so that there are specific steps. Each one is turned on or off with a very specific enzyme or catalyst that the body makes and releases. And these nanoparticles are non-specific, so they go in like throwing wild cards or fairy dust, toxic fairy dust, into the cell, and they cause all kinds of dysfunction because things are turning on and off, and it'd be like letting a whole bunch of small kids in a room with light switches all over the room, and they'd be turning them on and off and making the room really crazy with the light. Well, that's what the nanoparticles do in the cell.
Now, let me ask you, because we're moving along in this segment. We've discussed, and you've written about, that the purpose of this Fukushima, let's call it weapon of mass destruction, is an intentional depopulation and ecocidal mission to depopulate the planet, to reduce the population, and that even the weather warfare capabilities of HAARP are used to move the radiation around intentionally. Could you talk about that with more precision and link it in with the recent discoveries that you've made with this new Wigner effect, and give us more of a sense of the dynamics of how these controllers have been using Fukushima as a weapon of mass destruction in a way that neither the media, so that the media and the world population are not aware of what's happening.
They're not allowed to talk about it either.
Yeah.
General Electric and Westinghouse own ABC and NBC. So the media is controlled by them. The corporations control them. It's a huge cover-up. But let's go back to Oak Ridge Nuclear Weapons Lab in Tennessee. This is kind of where it started. And it's where a scientist named Dr. Wigner came in around World War II from the Vienna School. He was part of the sort of the Habsburg territories, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Holy Roman Empire before that. And this is where many of these scientists came from who are involved in these depopulation programs. Edward Teller, for instance, came from Hungary. He had a Rockefeller fellowship before he was a grad student in Hungary when he got that. And he came through Niels Bohr's lab in Copenhagen and got a helicopter ride into Washington, D.C. Okay, Edward Teller ended up being called Dr. Strangelove for very good reasons. He loved bombs. He loved the hydrogen bomb. He loved destroying people and things. Basically, he was a psychopath. And he's the one who came up with the plan to dump the fluoride from the uranium enrichment process and depleted uranium into the U.S. public drinking supply. Now, people believe that his philosophy was that dilution is the solution to pollution. But in fact, when you put him together with Wigner, who studied the biological and the other effects of radiation on metals, which is to turn everything into dust, break the bonds of the molecules and so forth. He was at Oak Ridge, and he had a number of Viennese or Austrian scientists who were always also sent there in World War II as refugees. And one of them, after he'd worked at Oak Ridge in the radiation field, he was hired as CEO of Monsanto. So the Monsanto food modification, genetic modification, is sandwiched in and carefully interacts with the radiation effects that Wigner described and the fluoride and other chemicals that they're putting in drinking water now, that Teller was the father of that program. So that's pretty much most of these depopulation eugenics programs, even going back to the 1500s, came out of the Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, so there are those three interacting. It's a ternary weapon system where 1 + 1 + 1 on their own, they're not so bad, or they have modest effects. But when you put them together and people are ingesting those and inhaling them and everything, there's a huge multiplier effect, so you can use less and get a higher kill rate.
The Golightly Marshall Hour on freedomtalkradio.net.